The escape pod screamed through Earth's atmosphere like a dying star. Inside, Velnara held her daughter close, whispering prayers in a language no human had ever heard. The pod's controls sparked and failed, one system after another going dark. She had stolen this vessel 3 months ago, fleeing her homeworld with nothing but her child and the clothes on her back. Now it seemed that desperate escape would end in fire. Lyra whimpered against her mother's chest. The child was only 7 years old by human counting, though her people measured time differently. Her skin glowed with a soft blue light, dimmer than it should be. The genetic mutation that had marked her for death also made her weak, her telepathic abilities wild and uncontrolled. The pod hit something hard. Metal shrieked. Velnara's world became spinning darkness and pain, then silence. She woke to golden sunlight streaming through a cracked viewport. Every part of her body hurt. The pod had carved a deep trench through what looked like a field of golden grain. Smoke rose from the damaged hull. She could smell burning circuits and something else, something organic and sweet. Lyra lay unconscious beside her, breathing but unmoving. A deep cut marked her forehead, leaking silver blood. Velnara's training as a medical technician kicked in. She checked her daughter's pulse, her breathing, her neural responses. The child would live, but she needed proper care soon. The pod's emergency systems were completely dead. No communications, no repair drones, no hope of rescue, though rescue from her own people would mean death anyway. The Silvani Council did not forgive defiance, and she had committed the ultimate crime. She had chosen her imperfect child over the purity of their race. Velnara forced the hatch open. It resisted, then gave way with a groan of twisted metal. She climbed out into a world she did not recognize. The sky was blue, not the violet of home. A yellow sun hung overhead, smaller and warmer than the binary stars she had known all her life. The air smelled strange, full of unfamiliar scents. The golden grain stretched in every direction, waving gently in a breeze that felt too thick, too rich with oxygen. She went back for Lyra, lifting her daughter as carefully as possible. The child weighed almost nothing in her arms. Velnara's people were stronger than they looked, their muscles denser than human tissue. But exhaustion and injury made even this simple task difficult. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. Something moving through the grain. Velnara's hand went to the energy blade hidden in her belt. It was a short-range weapon, barely powerful enough to threaten another Silvani, but it was all she had. She positioned herself between the approaching figure and her daughter, ready to fight even though she could barely stand. A man emerged from the grain. He was unlike anyone Velnara had ever seen. His skin was tan, weathered by sun and wind. Dark hair fell across his forehead, streaked with gray. He wore simple clothes, faded and patched. His hands were rough, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. He carried a tool of some kind, wooden handle worn smooth. The man stopped when he saw her. His eyes went wide, taking in her blue skin, her four-fingered hands, the silver blood on her clothes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then his eyes shifted to the child in her arms. Something in his expression changed. The surprise remained, but it was joined by something else. Concern, maybe, or recognition of a universal truth, a mother protecting her child. He said something in a language Velnara did not understand. His tone was gentle, questioning. He took a step forward, hands raised to show he meant no harm. Velnara tightened her grip on Lyra. She did not reach for her weapon, but her body language screamed warning. "Stay back, do not come closer." The man seemed to understand. He stopped, maintaining his distance. He said something else, softer this time. Then he pointed to himself and spoke a single word. Daehyun, a name. He was telling her his name. Velnara hesitated. Her people had abandoned names long ago, preferring designation codes that indicated genetic lineage and social function. But she remembered the old stories, the histories from before the Council's rule. Names were personal, individual. They meant something beyond genetics and duty. She pointed to herself with her free hand. Velnara. Then she looked down at her daughter. Lyra. Daehyun nodded slowly. He repeated the names, his pronunciation rough but recognizable. Then he pointed toward the horizon, where Velnara could see structures in the distance. Buildings of some kind. He made a gesture she interpreted as invitation. Come with me. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. Trust no one. Expect betrayal. These were the lessons drilled into every Silvani from birth. Other species were inferior, dangerous, not to be trusted. And yet, what choice did she have? Lyra needed help. The pod was destroyed. They had no food, no water, no shelter. And there was something about this man, this Daehyun. The way he had stopped when she showed fear. The way he looked at Lyra not with disgust or curiosity, but with simple human concern for an injured child. Velnara made her decision. She nodded. Daehyun's face relaxed into something that might have been relief. He turned and began walking through the grain, glancing back to make sure she followed. He moved slowly, accommodating her injured pace. The walk took longer than it should have. Velnara's legs threatened to give out several times. Her vision blurred at the edges. Only her determination to save Lyra kept her moving. The child stirred once, whimpering, and Velnara whispered reassurances she did not believe. The buildings grew closer. She could see now that they were simple structures. A large house, several smaller buildings, areas enclosed by wooden fences. Animals moved in some of the enclosures, creatures she did not recognize. Everything looked old but cared for, maintained by someone who understood the value of what they had. Daehyun led her to the main house. He opened a door and stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter first. It was a small gesture, but it spoke of trust. He was giving her the advantage, allowing her to see inside before committing herself. The interior was dim and cool after the bright sunlight. Simple furniture, clean but worn, photographs on the walls showing people who looked like Daehyun, smiling faces frozen in time. The smell of food, faint but present. This was a home lived in and loved. Daehyun guided her to a room with a soft bed. He pointed to it, then to Lyra, making his meaning clear. Put her down. Let her rest. Velnara laid her daughter on the bed as gently as possible. Lyra's breathing was shallow but steady. The cut on her forehead had stopped bleeding, but it needed treatment. Daehyun disappeared and returned with a box full of medical supplies. They were primitive by Silvani standards but recognizable. Bandages, antiseptics, tools for cleaning wounds. He set the box down and stepped back, giving Velnara space to work. She began treating Lyra's injuries, her hands shaking with exhaustion. Daehyun watched for a moment, then quietly left the room. Velnara heard him moving around the house, heard water running, heard the sounds of someone preparing food. For the first time since fleeing her homeworld, Velnara allowed herself to feel something other than fear. It was small, fragile, barely there at all, but it was real hope. 3 days passed in careful silence. Velnara stayed in the guest room with Lyra, venturing out only when necessary. She watched Daehyun through the window, studying his patterns. He woke before dawn each morning, started a fire in the kitchen, made simple food. Then he went outside to tend his animals and work his land. He never demanded anything. He left food outside their door 3 times a day. Simple meals of rice, vegetables, sometimes eggs. He knocked gently to let them know it was there, then walked away. He never tried to enter without permission. He never asked questions they could not answer. Lyra's condition improved slowly. The cut on her forehead healed, leaving a thin silver scar. Her strength returned in small increments. But the telepathic episodes continued. They came without warning, sudden bursts of uncontrolled mental energy that left her screaming and thrashing. Velnara held her through each one, shielding her daughter's mind as best she could, absorbing the psychic overflow until it passed. Daehyun heard one of these episodes on the second night. Velnara tensed, waiting for him to burst in to demand explanations or call for help, but he simply waited outside the door until the screaming stopped. Then he knocked softly and left a cup of warm tea. On the 4th morning, Velnara woke to find Lyra missing from the bed. Panic seized her. She grabbed her energy blade and rushed into the main house, ready for anything. But what she found stopped her cold. Lyra stood by the kitchen window, her small hand pressed against the glass. Outside, Daehyun was scattering feed for his chickens. The birds clustered around his feet, pecking at the ground. One brave hen hopped onto his boot. Lyra's eyes were wide with wonder. She had never seen creatures like this. On their homeworld, animals were kept in sterile facilities, bred for specific purposes, never allowed to simply exist. Daehyun looked up and saw them watching. He smiled, a gentle expression that reached his eyes. He said something in his language, his tone warm and inviting. Lyra looked up at her mother, a question in her eyes. Can I go outside? Velnara's first instinct was to refuse. Outside meant exposure, danger, the possibility of being seen. But she saw the hope in her daughter's face, the first real interest Lyra had shown in anything since they fled. How could she deny that? She nodded slowly. Lyra's face lit up like a star. They went outside together, Velnara keeping one hand on her weapon. The morning air was cool and fresh. Dew sparkled on the grass. The chickens scattered at their approach, then slowly returned, curiosity overcoming caution. Daehyun held out his hand to Lyra, showing her the feed. She took a handful carefully, her 4 fingers awkward with the small grains. He showed her how to toss it, how to stand still and let the birds come to her. One hen approached Lyra, head tilted, examining this strange blue creature. Lyra held perfectly still, barely breathing. The hen pecked at a seed near her foot, then looked up at her with one bright eye. Lyra giggled. It was the first happy sound Velnara had heard from her daughter in months. The sound hit her like a physical blow, bringing tears she did not expect. Daehyun looked at Velnara and saw those tears. He did not ask why. He simply nodded, understanding something beyond words. The days developed a rhythm. Daehyun worked his farm. Velnara and Lyra explored carefully, staying close to the buildings. They discovered the barn with its smell of hay and old wood. They found the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. They watched the cows in their pasture, massive creatures that moved with surprising grace. Lyra was fascinated by everything. She touched plants and they seemed to respond, growing slightly greener, slightly healthier. Her telepathic gift, so dangerous and uncontrolled when directed at people, worked differently with living things. She could sense what they needed: water, sunlight, nutrients. It was as if she spoke their language. Daehyun noticed this. One afternoon he brought Lyra to his vegetable garden. Several plants were struggling, their leaves yellow and wilted. He pointed to them, then to Lyra, making his question clear without words. Can you help? Lyra knelt by the first plant. She placed her small hands on the soil around it, closed her eyes and concentrated. Her skin glowed brighter, that distinctive blue light pulsing gently. Velnara tensed, ready to intervene if the telepathic energy got out of control. But nothing went wrong. Lyra's gift flowed smoothly, naturally. She sensed that the plant needed deeper water, that its roots could not reach the moisture below the surface. She could not fix that herself, but she showed Daehyun, pointing down with emphasis. He understood immediately. He brought water and soaked the soil deeply. Within an hour, the plant's leaves began to perk up. Daehyun looked at Lyra with something like awe. He said a word in his language, Gamsahabnida. Then he placed his hand over his heart. Thank you. Velnara did not know his language, but she understood his meaning. Her daughter, marked as defective by their people, had just done something useful and good. That evening, Daehyun invited them to eat with him at his table. Velnara hesitated, old habits of segregation and superiority making her uncomfortable. But Lyra was already climbing into a chair, eager to be included. The meal was simple: rice, vegetables from the garden, eggs from the chickens. Daehyun showed them how to use the strange utensils, patient when they struggled. He spoke to them in his language, knowing they did not understand but filling the silence with gentle sounds. After dinner, he brought out a book with pictures. He pointed to objects and said their names in his language. Bab, and pointed to rice. Mul, and pointed to water. Jib, and gestured to the house around them. Lyra repeated the words carefully, her pronunciation awkward but determined. Velnara found herself doing the same. Learning, connecting, beginning to understand this strange world they had crashed into. Before bed, Daehyun showed them something else. He pulled out a photograph from a drawer, old and faded. It showed a younger version of him with 2 people, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a small girl, perhaps 5 years old. He pointed to the woman and said Halmioni, then to the girl and said Yodongseng. His voice carried weight. Carried loss, grandmother, sister. Velnara recognized family even if she did not know the words. She looked at Daehyun with new understanding. He knew what it meant to lose people. He knew what it meant to be alone. She pointed to herself and Lyra, then made a gesture encompassing them both. Family, she tried to say without words. He had given them sanctuary. He had shown them kindness. He had treated them not as aliens or defects, but as people who needed help. Daehyun nodded. He repeated a word he had taught them earlier. Gajog, family. That night, for the first time since stealing the escape pod, Velnara slept without nightmares. Lyra curled against her, breathing softly, at peace. Through the window she could see stars. Not the stars of home, but stars nonetheless. Constant, unchanging. Proof that some things endured no matter how far you traveled. In the morning, she found Daehyun in the kitchen. He was making breakfast, humming softly to himself. When he saw her, he smiled and said, "Annyeonghaseyo" in greeting. Velnara tried to return the phrase. Her pronunciation was terrible, but he did not laugh. He simply smiled wider and repeated it slowly, helping her learn. She realized something then. She had been wrong about other species. Her people taught that only Silvani possessed true intelligence, true compassion, true worth. But this human, this simple farmer, had shown more genuine kindness than any member of the council ever had. He asked for nothing in return. He expected nothing. He simply helped because it was the right thing to do. For the first time in her life, Velnara questioned everything she had been taught. Maybe defects were not weaknesses. Maybe purity was not strength. Maybe the council's truth was just another word for fear. She watched Daehyun crack eggs into a pan, his movements practiced and sure. This human had made his small farm into a sanctuary. He had given her something more precious than all the advanced technology of her people. He had given her hope that being different did not mean being wrong. 2 weeks passed like water flowing over stones, smooth and steady. Velnara's injuries healed completely. Her strength returned, greater than before now that she was no longer running on fear and exhaustion alone. She began helping Daehyun with his work, finding that physical labor brought a strange kind of peace. The first time she lifted a feed bag that Daehyun had been struggling with, his eyes went wide. The bag weighed perhaps 50 kilograms, but she hoisted it easily onto one shoulder. Her people's density made them far stronger than they appeared. What would exhaust a human was merely moderate effort for her. Daehyun laughed, a sound of pure surprise and delight. He made a gesture of mock defeat, holding up his hands. Then he pointed to a pile of similar bags that needed moving. She understood. This was now her job. She found she did not mind. There was satisfaction in work, in using her body for something other than fleeing. She moved the feed bags, helped repair a section of fence that had rotted, lifted heavy posts that would have required machinery. Daehyun worked beside her, never asking her to do everything, sharing the labor as best he could. Lyra spent her days in the garden. Her telepathic gift grew stronger, more controlled when focused on plants. She could sense their needs with increasing clarity. She showed Daehyun which plants needed more water, which needed different soil, which were fighting off disease. Under her guidance, the garden flourished like never before. Daehyun started teaching them his language more seriously. Each evening after dinner, they sat at the table with books and pictures. He was patient when they struggled, enthusiastic when they succeeded. He taught them not just words, but meanings, context, culture. Gomab sumida, Velnara practiced, the syllables clumsy in her mouth. Thank you. Johayo, Daehyun encouraged. Good. Lyra learned faster than her mother. Children always did. Within days, she was forming simple sentences, her pronunciation clearer. She followed Daehyun around, asking questions in broken Korean, pointing at things and demanding to know their names. Ige moyeo? She would ask. What is this? And Daehyun would answer every time, no matter how many times she asked. One evening, Velnara decided it was time. She needed to tell Daehyun the truth. He deserved to know what he had welcomed into his home, what dangers he might face because of them. She sat him down at the table after Lyra went to bed. Using her improving Korean, supplemented with gestures and drawings, she told him their story. She drew pictures of her homeworld, of the council, of the genetic testing that had marked Lyra for termination. She showed him the telepathic episodes using hand movements to indicate the mental energy that Lyra could not control. She drew the escape pod, the flight through space, the crash landing, and then she drew what worried her most. More pods, more Silvani coming to find them. She drew hunters with weapons. She made it clear that anyone who helped them would be in danger. Daehyun listened to all of it without interrupting. His expression grew more serious as she spoke, but not angry. Not afraid, just thoughtful. When she finished, he sat quietly for a long moment. Then he stood and left the room. Velnara's heart sank. She had told him too much. He was going to call authorities or tell them to leave or something worse. But he came back carrying a small wooden box, old and worn. He opened it carefully and pulled out a photograph, even more faded than the one he had shown them before. It showed a baby in a hospital bed surrounded by machines. The infant was tiny, impossibly fragile. Yodongseng, he said softly. My sister. He pulled out another photograph. The same child, perhaps 2 years old, laughing in a garden. Then another at age 5, the one from the family picture. And then a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. Velnara could not read the Korean text, but she understood the dates. Birth and death only 7 years apart. Daehyun spoke slowly, using simple words she could understand. His sister had been born with a weak heart. Doctors said she would not survive. But she lived for 7 years, fighting every day. She was happy, he said. She loved flowers. She loved chickens. She made their grandmother laugh. When the council came, he said, using Velnara's drawing to make sure she understood. When they said his sister should not live, his grandmother refused. She was a nurse. She knew medicine. She kept the child alive through determination and love. Daehyun looked directly at Velnara, his eyes intense. 그녀는 완벽했어요, he said. She was perfect. Velnara felt something break open in her chest. This human understood. He knew what it meant to fight for someone the world said was not worth saving. He reached across the table and took her 4-fingered hand in his 5-fingered one. The gesture was not romantic, not possessive. It was solidarity, connection, a promise that he would not abandon them. 당신은 여기 안전해요, he said carefully. You are safe here. That night, Velnara cried for the first time since fleeing her homeworld. She had held everything in for so long, staying strong for Lyra, refusing to show weakness. But here in this small farmhouse with a human farmer who understood loss, she let herself feel everything. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that they might actually survive. The next morning, she woke with new purpose. If danger was coming, they needed to prepare. She told Daehyun about Silvani tracking technology, about how her people could trace the pod's energy signature. She explained telepathic scanning, how trained hunters could sense minds from a distance. Daehyun listened carefully, then took her to his barn. He showed her the old storm cellar underneath, built by his grandfather decades ago. It was deep in the earth, lined with thick concrete and metal. He had not used it in years, but it was still solid. Velnara examined it with a technician's eye. The metal lining would interfere with telepathic scanning. The depth would shield against most surface detection. It was not perfect, but it was better than nothing. They spent the next several days preparing the cellar. Daehyun brought down blankets, water, preserved food. Velnara salvaged what she could from the crashed pod. A few medical supplies, her energy blade, a small emergency beacon she had disabled to prevent tracking. Lyra did not understand why they were preparing this hiding place. She was happy on the farm, growing healthier every day. Her telepathic episodes were less frequent now, less severe. The peaceful environment in her work with plants gave her control she had never had before. But Velnara knew better than to believe safety would last. The council would send someone. They always did. Stolen technology, a fugitive, proof that their genetic purity laws were being defied, they would come. One evening, while teaching Daehyun to recognize the signs of telepathic scanning, Lyra had an episode. It came suddenly without warning. One moment she was helping with dinner. The next she was on the floor screaming, her mind broadcasting raw fear and pain. Daehyun did not panic. He had seen this before. He dropped to his knees beside her, not touching, not restraining, just present. He spoke to her softly in Korean, words she probably could not hear but might sense anyway. Velnara knelt on Lyra's other side, using her own telepathic ability to shield and contain the energy. Together they weathered the storm. When it passed, Lyra lay exhausted between them, panting. She looked up at Daehyun with tears in her eyes. "Mianheo," she whispered. "I am sorry." Daehyun shook his head firmly. "Anyeo." "No." He tapped his chest, then pointed to her, then made a gesture encompassing the whole farm. "You belong here. You do not need to apologize for existing." It was a simple message, but profound. On their homeworld, Lyra's existence was an apology, a mistake that needed correcting. Here, with this human, she was simply a child who sometimes needed help. Later, after Lyra was asleep, Velnara found Dae-hyun standing outside, looking at the stars. She joined him, comfortable now with shared silence. "Gajog," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Family." Velnara repeated the word. It felt different now, weighted with meaning it had not carried before. On her world, family was about genetics, about maintaining bloodlines and purity. Here it seemed to mean something else. Choice, commitment, chosen connection. "Nay," she agreed. "Yes." Gajog. They stood together under alien stars, a mother, a child, and a human farmer who had decided that kindness mattered more than differences. Somewhere in the galaxy, hunters were likely already searching. But here now they had this moment of peace. Velnara would fight to protect it, and she knew without doubt that Dae-hyun would fight beside her. The recovery team arrived on a Tuesday morning exactly 23 days after the crash. Dae-hyun spotted them first. He had been checking the north field looking for signs of pest damage in the wheat when he saw the vessel descend. It was nothing like the broken pod that had crashed weeks before. This ship was sleek and dark, moving with controlled precision. It landed softly in the middle of his field, crushing wheat under its weight with casual disregard. Dae-hyun ran back to the farmhouse. His boots pounded against the dirt path. His lungs burned. He was not a young man anymore, but fear gave him speed. Velnara saw his face and knew immediately. She had been teaching Lyra to read Korean using one of Dae-hyun's old books. How she dropped it and grabbed her daughter's hand. "Goodri wassayo," Dae-hyun gasped. They came. Velnara felt ice flood her veins. She looked at Lyra, whose eyes went wide with understanding and terror. The child's telepathic senses were already picking up something. Foreign minds focused in hunting. They had practiced for this. Velnara grabbed the emergency bag they had prepared and headed for the barn. Dae-hyun followed, checking behind them constantly. The ship was perhaps 2 kilometers away, but Silvani could move fast when they wanted to. They reached the barn. Dae-hyun opened the concealed entrance to the storm cellar. It was dark down there, cold and earthy. Lyra began to shake. "Yama," she whimpered, using the Korean word for mother that she had learned. "Museo woyo." "I am scared." "Nado," Velnara admitted, climbing down with her. "I am too." Dae-hyun started to follow them down, but Velnara stopped him. She pointed to him, then to the house, making her meaning clear. He needed to stay above. If he disappeared too, the hunters would tear everything apart looking. Dae-hyun shook his head violently. "And Weo?" No, he was not leaving them, but Velnara was firm. She took his hand and squeezed it. "Jebel," she said, using one of the words he had taught her meant please. "Lyra," she gestured to her daughter. Someone had to be here to protect her if things went wrong. Dae-hyun understood. He looked at Lyra, then back at Velnara. His jaw tightened. He nodded once, accepting the logic, even though everything in him wanted to stay with them. He closed the cellar entrance and covered it with hay bales. Then he left the barn, walking slowly, trying to look calm. His grandfather's old rifle hung on the wall of his house. He had not fired it in years. He did not even know if it still worked. But he took it down anyway, checked that it was loaded, and walked out to meet the hunters. Down in the cellar, Velnara held Lyra close. The metal lining made the walls hum with a faint vibration. It was working, blocking telepathic scans, but they could still sense the presence above. 3 minds, sharp and focused, trained for exactly this kind of hunt. Lyra began to hyperventilate. Her telepathic control slipped. Energy leaked from her in panicked waves. "Simhohub," Velnara whispered, using the Korean phrase Dae-hyun had taught them. "Deep breath. Chonchani." Slowly, but Lyra could not calm down. She felt the hunters, felt their certainty, their righteousness. They believed they were doing something good, something necessary. That made them more dangerous than any weapon. Above ground, 3 figures emerged from the ship. They were tall, taller than Velnara by half a meter. Their skin shifted colors like liquid metal, camouflage that could adapt to any environment. They wore minimal armor, confident in their natural abilities. Each carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. The leader was named Canthil. He had known Velnara before her defection. They had trained together, worked together, shared duties in the medical corps. He believed in the council absolutely. The genetic purity laws were not cruelty in his view. They were compassion, preventing suffering by eliminating those who would suffer. He had volunteered to lead this recovery team. He wanted to give Velnara a chance to surrender peacefully. In his mind, he was being merciful. Daehyun walked out to meet them. He carried his rifle loosely pointed at the ground. Not threatening, but not unarmed either. He stopped about 20 meters from the Silvani, far enough to react if they attacked. Canthil's translator activated automatically, processing Daehyun's language. The device spoke in emotionless tones. "You are the landowner?" "I am," Daehyun replied. His voice was steady. His hands did not shake. "We are tracking stolen property. An escape pod crashed in this area 3 weeks ago. It carried 2 criminals, a female adult and a defective child." "Where are they?" Daehyun looked at the 3 Silvani. Up close they were impressive, powerful, graceful, clearly designed by evolution or engineering to be apex predators. Their weapons could probably vaporize him before he could blink, but he had made a promise. He had looked into Lyra's eyes and called her family. "They are under my protection," he said simply. Canthil seemed surprised. His skin rippled, colors shifting. "You do not understand the situation, human. The adult female stole council property and fled with a genetically compromised child. The child is a danger to itself and others. We are here to correct this situation." "Correct," Daehyun repeated. "You mean kill. We mean to prevent unnecessary suffering. The child's telepathic defect makes it unstable. It will never function properly. The merciful thing is to end its pain." Daehyun felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. He forced it down. Anger would not help here. The child has a name, Lyra, and she is not in pain. She is learning, growing, becoming who she is meant to be. Canthil's translator processed this. The alien's head tilted slightly. "You have been harboring them." "For how long?" 3 weeks. "Then you have seen the telepathic episodes. The instability, the danger." "I have seen a child who sometimes needs help," Daehyun said. "Like any child. Like my sister was." He told them about her then. About the 7 years she lived when everyone said she would not survive. About how she loved flowers and chickens and made their grandmother laugh. About how some people thought she should not exist, but she did, and she was perfect. "Your justice sounds like murder," Daehyun said. Wrapped in pretty words, but murder all the same. Canthil's 2 companions shifted restlessly. They were soldiers, trained to follow orders, not to debate philosophy with primitive humans. But their leader held up a hand, stopping them. "You do not understand our ways," Canthil said. "Our species has achieved perfection through careful selection. Every generation we eliminate weakness, preserve strength. It is how we have survived." "Survived," Daehyun echoed. "But are you alive?" The question seemed to confuse the translator. Canthil paused. "Explain." Daehyun gestured to his farm, to the fields and animals and growing things. "This is life, messy, imperfect, full of things that struggle and sometimes fail, but also full of things that surprise you, things that should not work but do. My sister should have died before she was born, but she lived 7 years, and every day of those 7 years mattered." "She mattered." "Sentiment," Canthil said dismissively. "Emotion clouding judgment." "Maybe," Daehyun admitted. "Or maybe you have forgotten what it means to be alive." For a long moment no one spoke. The morning sun climbed higher. Birds sang oblivious to the tension. Somewhere in the distance a cow lowed. Then Canthil's expression hardened. "This conversation is over. We will search your property. If you interfere, you will be neutralized. This is your only warning." Daehyun raised his rifle slightly, not pointing at anyone, but ready. "This is my land. You are not welcome here." The 2 soldiers moved forward, their weapons powered up with a rising whine. Daehyun's finger found the trigger. His heart hammered. He was one aging farmer against 3 trained aliens with superior weapons. This was suicide, he knew it, but he had made a promise. In the cellar, Lyra felt the confrontation above building toward violence. Her fear spiked. Her telepathic control shattered completely. A wave of pure terror exploded from her mind, radiating in all directions. Every human in Silvani within a kilometer felt it. The absolute terror of a child who believed she was about to lose everything she loved. The telepathic wave hit everyone at once. Daehyun staggered, his vision blurring. It was not like sound or light. It was pure emotion, bypassing his senses and slamming directly into his brain. Terror. Abandonment. The absolute certainty that death was coming. But underneath the fear, he felt something else. Love. Desperate protective love. A mother's love. A child's love for the people who had shown her kindness. The two Silvani soldiers dropped to their knees, their weapons clattering to the ground. They clutched their heads, overwhelmed. Their telepathic senses were far more sensitive than human ones. What Daehyun felt as a strong emotion, they experienced as a crushing force. Only Canthil remained standing, though his skin rippled with distress. His training allowed him to shield himself partially, but even he was affected. He looked toward the barn, his expression shifting from anger to something more complex. That was her, he said quietly. The child. That was the defect. Daehyun lowered his rifle slightly. His head still rang from the telepathic contact. That was fear. She is afraid you will kill her. Control like that should be impossible for one so young, Canthil said, more to himself than to Daehyun. Even trained adults cannot project that clearly, that powerfully. Maybe your people are wrong about what makes someone defective, Daehyun suggested. The wave faded slowly. The two soldiers recovered, climbing shakily to their feet. They looked at their leader, waiting for orders. Their confidence had been shaken. They had felt the raw emotion of a child fighting for survival. It was harder to see their target as just a genetic mistake after that. Canthil studied Daehyun carefully. The human was still holding his rifle, still standing between them and their objective, but there was no hatred in his stance. No desire for violence, just stubborn determination. Why? Canthil asked. Why would you die for them? They are not your species. They are nothing to you. Daehyun thought about how to answer. His Korean was limited when talking to Velnara and Lyra, but the translator made conversation easier. He could explain himself fully. When I found them, he said slowly, Velnara was hurt and carrying her child. She looked at me the way my grandmother looked at doctors when they said my sister should not be saved, like she would fight the whole universe to protect the person she loved. I recognized that look. I understood what it meant. He shifted the rifle to a more comfortable position. You say Lyra is defective, that she cannot control her abilities. But she has been here for 3 weeks and I have seen her grow stronger every day. She helps my garden grow. She makes my chickens healthier. She learns my language, reads my books, laughs at my jokes. She is a child. Just a child. A dangerous child, Canthil countered. You felt that wave. Imagine if it was not fear but rage. Imagine if she lost control completely. I have imagined it, Daehyun admitted. Velnara told me about the episodes. I have held Lyra through some of them. Yes, they are frightening. Yes, they are powerful. But they are getting better. She is learning control because she is safe here, because we do not treat her like a monster. He took a step forward, still not pointing the rifle but closing the distance slightly. Your council looks at Lyra and sees a defect to be eliminated. I look at her and see my sister. I see every child who was told they should not exist, who fought anyway, who loved and was loved despite everything. Canthil's skin rippled again, a sign of internal conflict. Sentiment, he repeated, but with less conviction than before. Maybe, Daehyun agreed again. But sentiment built this farm. Sentiment made me keep going after my sister died, after my grandmother died, after everyone I loved was gone. Sentiment is what makes life worth living. One of the soldiers spoke up, his voice uncertain. Sir, the projection was remarkably clean. No contamination, no mental damage, just pure emotion. That level of control from an untrained juvenile is unprecedented. Canthil did not respond. He was thinking, calculating. The mission parameters were clear. Recover the pod technology, retrieve the fugitive, eliminate the defective child. But the reality on the ground was more complicated than the council's orders suggested. Where is the pod? He asked Daehyun. Destroyed, Daehyun lied smoothly. I pulled out anything useful for medical supplies. The rest is scrap metal in my barn, and Velnara, nearby. If I give the order, Canthil said carefully, my soldiers will search this property. They will find the pod remnants. They will find Velnara and the child. You cannot stop us, no, Daehyun agreed, but I can slow you down. Make you work for it. Make noise that brings my neighbors to investigate. Make this messy and complicated instead of clean and quiet. He looked directly at Canthil. Or you could leave. Tell your council the pod was destroyed beyond recovery. Tell them the fugitives died in the crash. Walk away and let a mother raise her child in peace. That would be a lie. Yes, Dae-hyun said simply. Sometimes lies protect what is good. Canthil stood silent for a long moment. In the cellar beneath the barn, Velnara held Lyra tightly. The child had exhausted herself with that telepathic wave. She lay limp in her mother's arms, barely conscious. Velnara could sense the conversation above, the tension, the possibility of violence. She had her energy blade ready. If they breached the cellar, she would fight. She would die fighting if necessary, but she would not let them take Lyra without resistance. Above, Canthil made a decision. Show me the pod. Dae-hyun hesitated. It could be a trap, but he had no choice. He nodded and led the three Silvani to the barn. Inside, he showed them the wreckage. He had indeed stripped anything useful. The hull was crumpled, the systems destroyed. It looked like something that had survived a catastrophic crash, which it had. Canthil examined the wreckage carefully. His soldiers scanned it with their equipment. The pod was beyond repair, that much was clear. The technology could not be salvaged. One objective was already impossible. Where did the crash site end in your field? Canthil asked. Dae-hyun led them to the north field. The trench was still visible, though he had filled much of it in and replanted. It looked like a natural crash trajectory, ending in the barn area. Canthil studied it all. Then he looked at Dae-hyun. You are asking me to betray everything I believe in. I am asking you to question whether what you believe is right, Dae-hyun corrected. Your counsel says Lyra is defective, but she just projected emotion more clearly than any of you expected. Your counsel says she is dangerous, but she has hurt no one in 3 weeks. Your counsel says she should not exist, but she does exist and she is beautiful and bright and learning. He paused, then added, Maybe your counsel is wrong. Maybe perfection is not what you think it is. Canthil's 2 soldiers were listening. They had felt that telepathic wave. They had sensed the love underneath the fear. For soldiers trained to believe in absolute genetic purity, this mission had become uncomfortably complex. If I report them dead, Canthil said slowly, and they are later discovered alive, I will be executed for treason. Then make sure they are never discovered, Dae-hyun said. The moment stretched. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. The wheat rustled in the breeze. Everything waited on Canthil's decision. Finally, he spoke to his soldiers in their own language, too fast for the translator to process. They responded with what looked like surprise, then acceptance. They were not arguing. They were agreeing. Canthil turned back to Dae-hyun. I can give you one thing, time. I will report the pod destroyed, its occupants dead. I will file images of this crash site as evidence. But if Velnara or the child ever return to Silvani space, if they ever come to our attention again, I cannot protect them. Other hunters will not be as willing to look away. Dae-hyun felt relief flood through him. They will stay here. Earth is their home now. Make sure of it, Canthil warned. And human, understand this. I am not doing this because I agree with you. I am doing this because that child's telepathic projection showed me something I have spent my life trying not to see. Doubt. And I hate you for it. I can live with that, Dae-hyun said. Canthil and his soldiers returned to their ship. It lifted silently, hovering for a moment over the crushed wheat. Then it accelerated upward, disappearing into the blue sky. Dae-hyun ran to the barn. He opened the cellar entrance and climbed down quickly. Kudiri kasoyo, he called. They left. Velnara looked up at him with wide eyes. She was still holding Lyra, who was barely conscious. Jinja. Really? Dae-hyun confirmed. Jinja. He reached down to help them up. Ol Rawayo, come up. They emerged into the light, blinking. Velnara looked around, expecting weapons, expecting the worst. But there was only Dae-hyun, smiling with relief and exhaustion. She began to cry. Not tears of fear this time, but release. They had survived. Her daughter was safe. Dae-hyun put his arms around both of them, this strange family he had adopted. They stood together in the barn, holding each other, while sunshine streamed through the gaps in the old wood. The ship had barely disappeared into the sky when Velnara's relief turned to fear. She pulled away from Dae-hyun, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her 4 fingers trembled as she pointed upward. Anyeo, she said urgently. No. They come back. Dae-hyun frowned. What do you mean? They left. Velnara struggled with the Korean words. She gestured frantically, trying to explain. The Silvani never gave up that easily. Canthil might have doubts, but he was still a council hunter. He would think about what happened. He would question his decision. And he would return to finish the mission properly. Yonje? Taehyun asked. When? Velnara shook her head. She did not know. Maybe hours, maybe days. But they would come back. She was certain. They carried Lyra to the house. The child was drained from her telepathic outburst, sleeping deeply. Velnara laid her on the bed and stood watch, her energy blade in hand, ready for anything. Daehyun sat at the kitchen table, his grandfather's rifle within reach. They waited in tense silence. The hours crawled by. Lunchtime passed. Then afternoon. The sun began its descent toward evening. Velnara paced like a caged animal. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow was a threat. She kept checking on Lyra, making sure her daughter was still breathing, still safe. Myojoyo, Daehyun urged gently, pushing a plate of food toward her. Eat. But Velnara could not eat. Her stomachs churned with anxiety. Her people had 2 digestive chambers, an evolutionary adaptation to process a wider variety of foods. Right now, both felt tight and nauseous. As darkness fell, she made a decision. She could not live like this, waiting for the inevitable. She could not watch Lyra grow up in constant fear. And she could not allow Daehyun to suffer for his kindness. There was only one solution. One terrible, necessary solution. She waited until full dark. Then she began preparing. She gathered the few possessions they had, some clothes, the medical supplies from the pod, her energy blade. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake Lyra or alert Daehyun to her plan. But Daehyun noticed anyway. He appeared in the doorway of the guest room, watching her pack. Muoheo? He asked, what are you doing? Velnara did not look at him. She continued packing, her movements efficient and practiced. I go, she said in halting Korean. You keep Lyra. Daehyun crossed the room in 3 strides. He grabbed her shoulder, turning her to face him. What? Velnara met his eyes. In her own language, she explained. Then she repeated it slowly in Korean, using simple words he would understand. The hunters wanted her, not Lyra. If Velnara surrendered, they would leave the child alone. Canthil had suggested as much. The child could be re-educated, taught proper Silvani ways. They saw Lyra as a victim of her mother's crime, so Velnara would remove herself from the equation. She would go to them, offer herself, accept execution, and in return Lyra would live, here, safe, with Daehyun. Anyeo, Daehyun said firmly. No, Naben Gehug. Bad plan. Only plan, Velnara insisted. She touched his face gently with her 4-fingered hand. He had been kind to strangers. He had protected them when he had no reason to. He had given them hope. She would not repay that by bringing death to his door. Lyra needs mother, Daehyun argued. Lyra needs to live, Velnara countered. Mother is extra. She did not know the Korean word for expendable, but she conveyed the meaning. They argued in whispers, neither wanting to wake Lyra. Daehyun tried every angle he could think of. They would hide better. They would contact authorities. They would find another solution. But Velnara was immovable. She had made her choice. Finally, as dawn approached, she wrote a message for Lyra. Her Korean writing was shaky but readable. She told her daughter that she was brave and strong, that her gift was not a defect but something special, that she should stay with Daehyun and learn all she could about this strange, beautiful planet, that she was loved always. She left the note on the table. Then she looked at Daehyun one last time. Gomab Sumida, she said. Thank you. For everything. She walked out before he could stop her, heading toward the north field where the ship had landed. She activated her emergency beacon, the one she had salvaged from the pod. It would signal her presence to any Silvani scanners. It would bring them directly to her. Daehyun stood in the doorway, torn between stopping her and respecting her choice. He understood sacrifice. He understood a parent's love. But that did not make it easier to watch. In the bedroom, Lyra stirred. Her telepathic senses, even depleted, felt her mother's emotions: fear, determination, grief, goodbye. The child's eyes snapped open. Yama! She cried out. Mother! She ran from the room, stumbling in her weakness. Daehyun tried to catch her, but she slipped past him out the door into the pre-dawn darkness. She could sense her mother out in the field. She could feel what Velnara intended to do. Yama! Lyra screamed again, running as fast as her small legs could carry her. Andwayo, no. Velnara heard her daughter's voice and stopped. She turned to see Lyra running toward her, silhouetted against the farmhouse lights. Dahyun was following, trying to catch up. Dolaga! Velnara shouted, go back. But Lyra would not go back. She reached her mother and grabbed her, holding on with all her strength. Tears streamed down her face. Anwayo, she sobbed. Gajimayo. Do not go. Velnara knelt and held her daughter close. She had hoped to spare Lyra this moment. She had hoped to slip away quietly to make this easier, but there was no easy way to say goodbye to your child. You safe here, Velnara said softly. Dahyun is good. He teach you. He protect you. You have good life. Without you? Lyra asked, her voice breaking. That is not good life. The argument might have continued, but the sky above them began to glow. A ship was descending, smaller than before, faster, a single-person pursuit craft. Canthil was returning, alone. Dahyun reached them, breathing hard. He positioned himself between the descending ship and his family. His rifle was still in his hand. It seemed pathetically inadequate now. The ship landed with a soft hum. A hatch opened. Canthil emerged, but he was not wearing his armor. He carried no visible weapons. He walked toward them with his hands extended, showing they were empty. He stopped about 10 meters away. His translator activated. I knew you would do this, he said to Velnara. A mother's sacrifice, predictable, noble even. Then take me, Velnara said, standing. She kept Lyra behind her. Let child stay. You said she can be re-educated. Let it happen here. Canthil's skin rippled, colors shifting. I returned to tell you something. After I left, I thought about what the human said. About perfection. About what makes life worth living. And I realized something that will probably get me executed if my people ever discover it. He paused, then continued. Your daughter is not defective. She is the future. Her telepathic ability is not a mutation to be eliminated. It is evolution. Something new. Something our rigid genetic standards have been suppressing for generations. Velnara stared at him. What? We have bred ourselves into a corner, Canthil explained. No variation. No new traits. No adaptation. We are perfect, yes, but static. Unchanging. And in a universe that constantly changes, that is a kind of death. He looked at Lyra, who peeked out from behind her mother. That wave she projected. I have never felt anything so clear, so powerful, so precise, and she is untrained. Imagine what she could do with proper guidance. Imagine what it means that such abilities can emerge naturally. Why you tell me this? Velnara asked suspiciously. Because I am going to file a report saying you and your daughter died in the crash, Canthil said. I am going to destroy all evidence that you survived. I am going to betray the council because for the first time in my life, I believe they might be wrong. He took a step closer. But you must never return to Silvani space. You must never contact our people. You must disappear completely. Can you do that? Velnara looked at Dahyun, then at the farm, then at her daughter. Yes, she said. Yes, we can. Canthil nodded. Then he did something unprecedented. He placed his hand over his primary heart, a Silvani gesture of deep respect. Raise your child well. Teach her control. And perhaps someday when our people are ready, there will be others like her, others who prove that different does not mean defective. He turned to leave, then paused. The human was right. Sentiment is not weakness. I begin to understand that now. He returned to his ship. It lifted silently and vanished into the lightening sky. This time, Velnara believed he would not return. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons. Autumn gave way to winter, then winter to spring. The farm changed with the weather, and so did its inhabitants. Lyra grew stronger. Her telepathic episodes became rare, then almost non-existent. She learned that her gift worked best when she did not force it, when she let it flow naturally like water finding its path. The plants responded to her without words. She could sense what they needed before they showed visible signs of distress. The garden flourished under her care. Vegetables grew larger and healthier than Dahyun had ever seen. The fruit trees bloomed early and heavily. Even the wheat in the field seemed to stand straighter, grow fuller when Lyra walked among the rows. Neighbors began to notice. They asked Dahyun what his secret was. He smiled and said nothing, just shrugged and attributed it to good weather and better soil. But people talked. They wondered. Some wanted to see this magical garden for themselves. Velnara worried about the attention. She and Lyra stayed inside when visitors came. Daehyun explained them away as relatives from far away, family who did not speak Korean well and were shy around strangers. It was thin excuse, but most people accepted it. Farmers respected privacy. Lyra's Korean improved dramatically. She spoke with only a slight accent now, her vocabulary expanding daily. She read everything she could find, books, newspapers, even the seed packets from the supply store. She was hungry for knowledge about this world that had become her home. Daehyun taught her to read the land the way his grandfather had taught him, how to predict weather from clouds, how to know if soil was too acidic or too alkaline just by looking at what weeds grew there, how to understand the rhythms of planting and harvest. She learned quickly, her telepathic sensitivity giving her an edge. She could feel the soil's composition through her connection to the plants. She could sense approaching storms in the way insects and animals behaved. Velnara adapted too, though differently. She studied human medicine using books Daehyun bought from town. Her medical training translated surprisingly well. The basic principles of biology were universal, even if the specific anatomy differed. She began helping injured animals on the farm, setting broken bones on a chicken, treating an infection in a cow's hoof. She also built devices. Using salvaged components from the pod and materials Daehyun bought without asking questions, she created a shield generator. It was small, barely powerful enough to cover the farmhouse and immediate grounds, but it would hide their telepathic signatures from any scanning technology. It would keep them safe. The three of them fell into comfortable patterns. Morning started with breakfast together, Velnara cooking strange combinations that somehow tasted good. Then work. Daehyun and Velnara handling the heavy tasks, Lyra tending the garden and helping where she could. Evenings were for learning. They sat at the kitchen table with books and papers spread everywhere. Daehyun taught them Korean history and culture. Velnara shared stories from her world, tales of her people before the council's rule, when Silvani were individuals with names and choices. Lyra asked endless questions about everything. One spring evening, a neighbor named Jiwoo stopped by unexpectedly. She was an older woman who lived on the adjacent property, kind but curious. She had brought fresh bread as a gift, but really she wanted to meet these mysterious relatives everyone whispered about. Velnara and Lyra were in the garden when she arrived. There was no time to hide. They stood frozen as Jiwoo came around the house and spotted them. The woman stopped mid-step. Her eyes widened as she took in Velnara's blue skin, her 4 fingers, her distinctly non-human features. She looked at Lyra, smaller but clearly the same species. For a long moment, no one moved. Daehyun came running from the barn, too late to prevent the encounter. Then Jiwoo did something unexpected. She smiled. "Oh," she said simply. "You are the ones helping the garden grow." Velnara's hand moved toward her hidden blade, but Daehyun caught her wrist gently. He stepped forward, placing himself between his family and the neighbor, but not threateningly. "Halmione," he said respectfully, using the honorific for older women. "I can explain." "No need," Jiwoo interrupted. She walked closer, studying Velnara and Lyra with open curiosity but no fear. "My grandson reads those comic books about aliens and spaceships, always going on about visitors from other worlds. I told him it was nonsense," she laughed, a warm sound. "Guess I owe him an apology." Lyra moved slightly behind her mother, uncertain how to react. Jiwoo noticed and softened her approach. "Are you afraid of me, child?" she asked gently. "You should not be. Anyone who makes a garden this beautiful cannot be bad." Velnara found her voice. "Please," she said in careful Korean. "Do not tell others we are hiding." Jiwoo's expression became more serious. "Hiding from what? Or from whom?" Daehyun explained, keeping it simple. They were refugees. Velnara's people did not accept Lyra's differences. They had run to save her life. He had given them shelter. That was all. Jiwoo listened, nodding slowly. When he finished, she looked at all 3 of them. Then she made a decision that seemed to come easily to her. "I will not tell anyone," she said, "but you should know. This area is not used to keeping secrets. People will find out eventually. When they do, you will need friends who can vouch for you." She extended her hand to Velnara in the human gesture of greeting. After a moment's hesitation, Velnara took it. 4 fingers met 5 in a clasp that bridged worlds. "I am Jiwoo," the woman said, "and you are welcome here." Over the following months, Jiwoo became a regular visitor. She brought her grandson, a 12-year-old named Taijin who nearly fainted with excitement when he met real aliens. He had 1,000 questions, all of which Lyra patiently answered. More importantly, Jiwoo spread word through the community in her own way. Not revealing everything, but preparing the ground. She mentioned that Daehyun had taken in family members with medical conditions that made them sensitive to sunlight. She praised the improvements to his farm. She made sure people associated Daehyun's household with positive things. When the truth finally emerged, about a year after the crash, it happened gradually. A delivery driver saw Velnara from a distance. A veterinarian called to help with a sick horse noticed Lyra's unusual appearance. Word spread, as it always does in small communities. But by then, Daehyun's farm had become prosperous. The vegetables he sold at the market were the best anyone had tasted. His fruits won prizes at the county fair. His wheat yield was 30% higher than anyone else's. People knew something special was happening there. Some were afraid. Some wanted the aliens removed or reported to authorities. But many more were curious or pragmatic or simply kind. They had seen the good that Velnara and Lyra brought. They had benefited from the prosperity that spread from Daehyun's land. Jiwoo stood firm as an advocate. When someone suggested calling government officials, she reminded them how much tax revenue Daehyun's successful farm generated. When someone expressed fear, she pointed out that nothing bad had happened in over a year. When someone called for deportation, she asked where exactly they expected these beings to go. Taejin became Lyra's closest friend. He taught her about human children's games and music. She taught him to sense the emotions of plants. They were an odd pair, but genuine in their affection. On the anniversary of the crash, Daehyun organized a quiet celebration. Just the 3 of them, plus Jiwoo and Taijin. They ate together, shared stories, laughed at jokes that crossed species barriers. After dinner, Daehyun brought out a small package wrapped in simple paper. He handed it to Lyra. "Moeo?" she asked. "What is it?" "Yolobayo," he encouraged. Open it. Inside was a picture frame. Behind the glass was a photograph. Lyra standing in the garden, surrounded by sunflowers that had grown impossibly tall under her care. Her skin glowed with its natural blue light. Her smile was bright and genuine, but the frame also held something else. A document, printed and official-looking. It was an application for refugee status already filled out. Names, dates, circumstances. Everything they would need to make their presence legal. "We file this together," Daehyun explained. "Make you official, protected." Velnara stared at the document. "This makes you responsible for us. If we cause problems, you suffer too." "You're in Gajogyeo," Daehyun said firmly. "We are family. Gajogan hamkeheo. Family stays together." Lyra threw her arms around him. "Abba?" she said, using the word she had been hesitant to speak before. Dad Daehyun's eyes grew wet. He hugged her back, this child from another world who had taught him that love was not limited by genetics or species. Velnara joined the embrace, her 2 hearts full in a way they had never been on her homeworld. She had expected to die when she stole that escape pod. She had expected nothing but running and fear. Instead, she had found this, a human farmer who valued kindness over protocol, a community that chose acceptance over fear. A place where her daughter could grow without shame or limitation. The stars above were different than those of her birth world. The moon was the wrong color. The air smelled of unfamiliar things. But this planet, this small farm, this patchwork family, this was home. Outside, the garden grew in the darkness. Plants reached toward moonlight, their roots deep in alien soil.